Good evening. As the city sleeps beneath frost and stone, a lone guard begins another long winter watch in the silence of the night. The medieval world knew no electric lights to pierce the darkness, no central heating to ward off the bitter cold that crept through stone walls and wooden shutters. Yet somehow, night after night, guards maintained their vigilant posts through the longest winter hours, their lives shaped by patience, routine, and practical wisdom, passed down through generations of those who understood that survival meant more than simply enduring the cold. The first challenge that confronted every night guard was water. In the depths of winter, when temperatures plunged well below freezing for weeks at a stretch, water became both precious and treacherous. The wells that served the community during warmer months often froze solid, their surfaces covered with thick layers of ice that could support the weight of a grown man. Guards learned to read the subtle signs that indicated where liquid water might still flow beneath the frozen surface, watching for the faint wisps of vapor that rose from cracks in the ice, or listening for the barely audible sound of water moving in the depths below. Hands move, grip, lift, strike. The rhythmic percussion of metal against ice becomes a meditation in itself, each blow carefully measured to avoid shattering the tool or sending dangerous shards flying in the darkness. The process requires patience that modern minds can barely comprehend. A guard might spend an hour working to break through ice thick enough to stop a sword thrust, chipping away small fragments bit by bit, until finally, blessedly, the dark gleam of liquid water appears in the depths. The satisfaction of that moment, after so much careful labor, carries a warmth that spreads through cold, numbed limbs. But breaking through ice was only the beginning. Medieval guards discovered that water drawn from deep wells retained more heat than surface water, staying liquid longer when brought up in wooden buckets or leather containers. They learned to wrap these containers in layers of cloth or hide, creating primitive insulation that could keep water from freezing for several hours. Some guards carried small clay vessels close to their bodies, using their own body heat to prevent the water from turning to ice. The water warmed against their chests or tucked into the folds of their cloaks, becoming both sustenance and a source of comfort during the long hours before dawn. The scrape of metal on stone, rhythmic, deliberate. Guards who worked the same post night after night developed an intimate knowledge of where ice formed first and where it lingered longest. They knew which corners of the courtyard caught and held the wind, turning any moisture there into sheets of treacherous ice that could send an unwary person tumbling. They understood that the areas near stable walls, warmed slightly by the heat of animals within, might harbor small pockets of liquid water even on the coldest nights. This knowledge became survival, encoded in muscle memory, and passed along to younger guards through quiet demonstration, rather than formal instruction. Some guards carried small metal implements designed specifically for ice work, tools that could chip and scrape without dulling quickly against stone and frozen earth. These implements, often fashioned by local blacksmiths who understood the particular needs of night watch duty, featured thick handles that prevented the cold metal from stealing too much warmth from bare hands. The weight and balance of such tools mattered enormously during long hours of use, and experienced guards developed preferences as particular as those of any craftsman for their specialized equipment. Water, once obtained, had to be conserved and protected. Guards learned to take small sips rather than large drinks, allowing their bodies to process and warm the liquid gradually rather than shocking their systems with sudden cold. They discovered that moving water around in their mouths before swallowing helped prevent the sharp pain that came from drinking ice-cold liquid too quickly. Some carried small amounts of honey or preserved fruit that could be dissolved in water, providing both flavor and additional nourishment during the long watches. The transition from securing water to securing warmth within their watch posts happened naturally as guards settled into their duties for the night. Stone walls rise into darkness. Closer now, the massive blocks that formed the foundations of medieval fortifications reveal their own characteristics. Guards who worked the same posts repeatedly learned to read the personality of stone and mortar, understanding where drafts penetrated and where walls held heat longest after the sun disappeared. Door sealing became an art form practiced by those who understood that even the smallest gap could transform a tolerable watchpost into a miserable ordeal. Medieval doors, constructed from heavy oak planks held together with iron bands, rarely fit their frames with the precision that modern minds might expect. Wood expanded and contracted with changes in temperature and humidity, creating gaps that shifted throughout the seasons. Winter brought its own particular challenges as wood contracted in the cold, often leaving spaces around the edges of doors that invited frigid air to flow freely into enclosed spaces. Guards developed techniques for temporarily sealing these gaps using materials readily available during their duties. Cloth strips, often torn from worn clothing or obtained from the castle's stores, could be stuffed into cracks around door frames. These makeshift seals, while temporary, could dramatically reduce the amount of cold air that entered a guard post during a single watch. The process required patience and attention to detail, working methodically around the entire perimeter of a door to identify and block every source of a draft. Some guards carried small amounts of clay or mud that could be worked into larger gaps, creating more permanent seals that would serve multiple watches before needing replacement. This material, softened by the warmth of hands or breath, could be pressed into irregular spaces where cloth might not hold securely. The work had to be done carefully, ensuring that doors could still open and close properly while eliminating the worst sources of heat loss. Every morning, the same ritual unfolds as guards prepare for the possibility of wind changes that might turn a previously comfortable post into a wind tunnel. They learn to observe how air moves around buildings and walls, understanding that wind direction could shift during the night and transform the characteristics of their watch positions entirely. A door that provided adequate shelter when wind came from the south might become nearly useless when weather patterns shifted and brought Arctic air from the north. The knowledge of door sealing extended beyond simple gap filling to include understanding how to position barriers and screens that could redirect airflow away from essential areas. Guards learned to use their cloaks, staffs, and other equipment to create windbreaks that channeled cold air away from their bodies, while still allowing them to maintain proper watch over their assigned areas. These techniques required no special materials or tools, relying instead on careful observation and creative use of available resources. But even the most carefully sealed doors and cleverly positioned windbreaks could not provide adequate protection without proper attention to personal warmth, which led naturally to the sophisticated understanding of layered clothing that separated successful guards from those who suffered needlessly through their duties. Medieval guards understood layering in ways that would impress modern outdoor enthusiasts, though their knowledge came from necessity rather than recreation. The foundation of winter watch clothing began with the layer closest to the skin. Linen undergarments, while seemingly inadequate against severe cold, actually provided crucial benefits that guards learned to appreciate. Linen absorbed moisture from the body while allowing air circulation that prevented the dangerous accumulation of sweat that could freeze against the skin. Guards who could afford multiple linen undergarments often carried spare pieces that could be exchanged if the first layer became too damp from exertion or environmental moisture. Over the linen base, guards typically wore wool tunics of varying weights and textures. Wool retained its insulating properties even when damp, a characteristic that proved invaluable during long winter watches when snow, sleet, or simple humidity could penetrate outer garments. The lanolin naturally present in wool provided some water resistance, helping to shed light precipitation while maintaining warmth. Guards learned to appreciate different types of wool for different purposes. Understanding that tightly woven wool provided better wind resistance, while looser weaves trapped more insulating air. Cold, sharp, biting exposed skin where gaps appear between layers, teaching guards to pay attention to vulnerable areas that required special protection. Wrists, ankles, and necks became focal points for additional layers or specialized coverings that prevented heat loss from pulse points where blood vessels ran close to the surface. Guards discovered that keeping these areas warm had a disproportionate effect on overall body temperature, making targeted protection far more effective than simply adding bulk to their clothing. The outer layer typically consisted of a heavy cloak or mantle designed to shed wind and precipitation while trapping warm air underneath. These garments, often made from tightly woven wool treated with oils or waxes for water resistance, represented a significant investment for most guards. A quality cloak might last for years with proper care, providing reliable protection through countless winter watches. Guards learned to maintain these crucial garments, knowing where to make repairs and how to retreat the fabric to maintain its weather-resistant properties. Footwear received particular attention from experienced guards who understood that cold feet could make an entire watch miserable regardless of how well the rest of the body was protected. Leather boots, stuffed with straw, wool, or cloth scraps, provided insulation that could mean the difference between a tolerable night and genuine suffering. Some guards wrapped their feet in additional cloth before putting on boots, creating extra layers of insulation and helping to prevent chafing during long hours of standing or walking. Hand protection presented unique challenges since guards needed to maintain dexterity for handling weapons, keys, and other equipment, while preventing frostbite in extremities that were particularly vulnerable to cold injury. Mittens provided better warmth than individual finger coverings, but guards often needed the fine motor control that only came from having fingers free. Many developed hybrid approaches, wearing thin inner gloves that allowed dexterity while carrying heavier mittens that could be quickly donned when maximum warmth was needed. The art of layering extended beyond simply putting on multiple garments to include understanding how different combinations of clothing work together to create effective insulation systems. Guards learned that loose layers trapped more warming air than tight-fitting garments, but also discovered that layers had to be secure enough to prevent cold air from infiltrating between them during movement. The balance between mobility and warmth required constant adjustment as conditions changed throughout the night. As guards settled into their watch routines, properly dressed and equipped for the long hours ahead, their attention naturally turned to the evening tasks that would occupy their time and help maintain alertness through the darkest hours. These tasks served multiple purposes, providing both practical benefits and mental engagement that helped prevent the dangerous drowsiness that could overcome guards during the quiet hours before dawn. Equipment maintenance formed a central part of evening watch activities. Guards used the long, quiet hours to inspect and care for the tools and weapons upon which their effectiveness and safety depended. Leather straps and bindings required regular attention to prevent cracking and failure in cold weather. Guards learned to work leather oil into straps and sheaths using their hands, both maintaining their equipment and keeping their fingers flexible through the repetitive motion. Metal items needed particular attention during winter watches, as moisture could quickly lead to rust that would compromise the integrity of weapons and tools. Guards carried cloths for wiping down metal surfaces and learned to keep blades lightly oiled to prevent corrosion. The process of cleaning and maintaining a sword or spear could occupy substantial time while providing the kind of detailed, absorbing work that helped maintain alertness without requiring intense concentration that might interfere with maintaining watch over assigned areas. Fire management consumed considerable attention during winter watches, though guards had to balance the warmth and light that fires provided against the risk of creating beacons that might attract unwanted attention, or accidentally starting larger fires that could threaten the structures they were supposed to protect. Small, carefully controlled fires in braziers or fire pots provided both warmth and light for detailed work, while remaining relatively discreet. Guards learned to build fires that produce maximum heat, with minimum smoke and flame, using dry wood and understanding how different materials burned in various weather conditions. The process of maintaining a fire throughout a long winter night required careful planning and resource management. Guards learned to bank coals in ways that would provide steady heat for hours with minimal attention, covering the fire with ash or sand that would control the burn rate while preventing the complete extinction of the flames. This technique required understanding how different types of fuel burned and how environmental factors like wind and humidity affected fire behavior. Food preparation often became part of evening watch routines, as guards discovered that having warm food during the coldest hours provided both physical and psychological benefits that helped them maintain effectiveness throughout their duties. Simple foods that could be prepared over small fires or heated using coals from braziers offered substantial comfort during long winter watches. Guards learned to prepare foods that would provide sustained energy rather than quick bursts of warmth, understanding that steady nourishment helped maintain body heat more effectively than occasional large meals. Bread, when available, could be toasted over coals or warmed near fires, transforming cold, hard loaves into comforting, warm food that provided both nourishment and the psychological boost that came from eating something pleasant during difficult conditions. Soups and broths, when they could be prepared or obtained, provided liquid and warmth simultaneously, while offering more varied nutrition than the simple bread and preserved meat that formed the basis of most guard rations. The rhythm of evening tasks created a structure that helped guards manage the psychological challenges of spending long hours alone in cold, dark conditions. Having a series of activities that needed attention throughout the watch provided mental anchors that prevented the kind of drifting inattention that could make guards vulnerable to both external threats and internal dangers, like falling asleep or becoming too cold to function effectively. These evening routines naturally evolved into opportunities for the kind of storytelling that helped guards maintain their sanity and connection to the larger human community during the isolating experience of solitary night watches. Mental storytelling served purposes that went far beyond simple entertainment, providing cognitive exercise that helped maintain alertness while offering psychological comfort that made the long hours more bearable. Guards developed extensive mental repertoires of stories, songs, and recitations that could occupy their minds during the quieter periods of their watches. These might include traditional tales learned during childhood, stories heard from travelers and merchants, or personal memories that could be revisited and examined during the long hours of darkness. The process of mentally rehearsing these stories served as a form of meditation that kept the mind engaged without requiring the kind of intense focus that might interfere with maintaining awareness of the surrounding environment. Religious prayers and devotions formed another category of mental activity that many guards found helpful during winter watches. The familiar rhythms of well-known prayers provided comfort and structure, while the act of recitation helped maintain mental alertness. Guards often knew extensive portions of religious texts by memory, having heard them repeated countless times during regular worship services. The process of working through these familiar passages provided a sense of connection to the larger community even during the most isolated moments of night watch duty. Some guards developed the practice of mentally planning and rehearsing various scenarios they might encounter during their duties, working through potential responses to different types of threats or emergencies. This kind of mental preparation served practical purposes, while providing the kind of engaging mental activity that helped prevent boredom and drowsiness. Guards might mentally rehearse the process of raising an alarm, visualize the steps involved in responding to different types of intrusions, or work through the procedures for dealing with fires or other emergencies. The transition from active mental engagement to the deeper, more meditative awareness that characterized the final hours of winter watches happened gradually as guards settled into the profound quiet that descended over medieval communities during the deepest part of the night. This quiet represented more than simple absence of noise. It embodied a complete transformation of the sensory environment that guards learned to appreciate and navigate. Frozen silence carries qualities that modern people rarely experience, living as most do with the constant background hum of electrical devices and mechanized transportation. Medieval winter nights offered a quality of quiet so complete that guards could hear their own heartbeats and the subtle sounds of their own breathing. Snow, when it fell, muffled even these small sounds, creating an environment of almost supernatural stillness that could be both peaceful and unsettling for those not accustomed to such complete absence of familiar audio landmarks. In this profound quiet, guards developed enhanced sensitivity to the small sounds that did penetrate the winter silence. The distant call of night birds, the scurrying of small animals through snow or fallen leaves, the creak and groan of wooden structures settling in the cold all became magnified in importance. Guards learned to distinguish between sounds that represented normal environmental activity and those that might indicate human presence or potential threats. The sound of footsteps in snow carried distinctive characteristics that experienced guards could interpret with remarkable precision. Fresh snow produced different sounds than packed snow, and the gait patterns of different types of travelers created recognizable audio signatures. Guards developed the ability to estimate the number of approaching people, their approximate size and weight, and even their level of urgency based solely on the sounds of their movement through winter conditions. Wind, when it blew during winter watches, created its own complex symphony of sounds as it moved around buildings, through bare trees, and across open spaces covered with snow. Guards learned to interpret these wind sounds, understanding which indicated normal weather patterns and which might signal approaching storms or other changes in conditions that could affect their duties. The howling of wind through gaps in stonework or around building corners provided information about wind direction and intensity that helped guards anticipate how conditions might change during the remainder of their watch. Animals' sounds took on particular significance during winter watches, as the normal daytime activity patterns of most creatures shifted dramatically during cold weather. The calls of owls and other nocturnal hunters provided a kind of audio landscape that guards learned to read for information about the broader environment around their posts. Changes in normal animal activity patterns often indicated the presence of human intruders or other disturbances that warranted attention. As dawn approached and the long winter watch drew toward its close, guards experienced a gradual transformation in both the visual and auditory environment around them. The first hints of approaching daylight appeared not as visible illumination, but as subtle changes in the quality of darkness and the behavior of nocturnal creatures. Birds began to stir before any human eye could detect the coming dawn, their movements and quiet calls providing the first reliable indication that the night was finally ending. The cold that had been a constant companion throughout the watch often intensified during the hour before dawn, as if winter was making one final assault before yielding to the returning sun. Guards learned to expect this pre-dawn chill and prepared for it both physically and mentally. Understanding that the coldest part of their watch often came just before relief arrived with the morning light. If this kind of slow history helps you unwind, consider subscribing for more stories that explore the practical wisdom and quiet endurance of people who lived very different lives in very different times. Now, settle in, soften your focus, and let the night take its time as we continue exploring how these patient guardians of medieval communities survived and thrived through the longest, coldest watches that winter could offer. The techniques they developed and the wisdom they accumulated over countless frozen nights offer insights that reach across the centuries to touch something fundamental about human resilience and the quiet courage required to stand watch while others sleep safely in their beds. The hours continue their steady march through the deep winter night, each moment bringing its own subtle shifts in temperature, sound, and the quality of darkness that surrounds the watchful guard. As the techniques of water procurement and warmth conservation become second nature, attention turns toward the more nuanced aspects of surviving these extended vigils, the small discoveries that separate merely enduring a winter watch from finding a kind of austere comfort within its challenges. The relationship between a guard and the specific geography of their assigned post develops into something approaching intimacy over the course of many nights. Every stone step, every wooden beam, every iron fitting reveals its particular characteristics under different weather conditions. The metal handle of a door that feels merely cold during autumn nights becomes a shocking conductor of winter's bite, capable of stealing warmth from unprotected hands in moments. Guards learn to approach such hazards with the respect they deserve, using cloth wrappings or keeping their hands covered when touching metal surfaces that have been exposed to freezing air for hours. Stone surfaces present their own spectrum of challenges and opportunities. The massive blocks that form the foundation of medieval fortifications absorb cold during the long winter nights, becoming reservoirs of chill that can draw heat from anyone who leans against them carelessly. Yet these same stones, when they have been warmed by fires or braziers, can retain that heat for surprisingly long periods, offering pockets of relative warmth that experienced guards learn to identify and utilize. The texture of stone changes in extreme cold, becoming somehow more brittle and sharp under the touch, as if the cold has crystallized not just moisture, but the very substance of the rock itself. Wooden surfaces require different consideration entirely. The heavy oak planks that form doors and shutters contract in the cold, creating gaps and irregularities that shift throughout the night as temperatures continue to drop. The grain of the wood becomes more pronounced in cold weather, creating ridges and valleys that can catch and hold ice or snow. Guards discover that wood retains some warmth longer than stone, but loses it more quickly than might be expected, requiring constant awareness of which surfaces might offer momentary comfort and which have become too cold to touch safely. The accumulation of ice creates an entirely separate landscape that overlays the familiar geography of courtyards and walkways. What begins as a thin skin of frozen moisture on stone steps gradually builds into treacherous surfaces that can turn routine movement into dangerous navigation. Guards develop a distinctive way of walking on ice, a careful shuffle that maintains contact with the ground while testing each step before committing full weight to it. The sound of footsteps changes completely on icy surfaces, the normal solid thump of boots on stone replaced by a sharper, more brittle sound that carries differently through the cold air. Ice forms in patterns that guards learn to read like a map of the night's weather. Smooth sheets indicate steady cold without wind, while rough, textured ice suggests that freezing occurred during windy conditions that disturbed the surface as it solidified. Thick accumulations mark areas where water pooled before freezing, creating obstacles that must be navigated carefully to avoid falls that could result in serious injury during the long hours when help might be far away. The interplay between wind and cold creates microclimates within even small areas that guards learn to recognize and exploit. A corner that provides shelter from the prevailing wind might be several degrees warmer than an exposed walkway just steps away. The lee side of a building can offer a pocket of relatively calm air that makes the difference between comfort and misery during particularly harsh nights. Guards develop mental maps of these microclimates, knowing where to position themselves during different wind conditions to minimize exposure while maintaining proper watch over their assigned areas. Wind patterns change throughout the night as temperature differences shift and weather systems move through the region. A sheltered position that provides excellent protection during the early evening hours might become a wind tunnel later in the night as air currents reorganize themselves around the cooling landscape. Experienced guards learn to anticipate these changes, watching for subtle signs in the movement of snow or the behavior of smoke from fires that indicate shifting wind patterns. The sound signature of wind varies dramatically depending on what it encounters as it moves through the medieval landscape. Wind moving through bare tree branches creates a different sound than wind whistling around stone corners or through wooden structures. Guards become connoisseurs of these wind sounds, able to distinguish between the normal voices of winter wind and unusual sounds that might indicate approaching weather changes or, more importantly, the presence of people moving through areas where they should not be. Breath becomes visible in the extreme cold, creating small clouds of vapor that dissipate quickly in the dry winter air. Guards learn to control their breathing patterns not just for comfort, but for concealment, understanding that visible breath can reveal their location to anyone observing from a distance. The rhythm of breathing changes in cold air, becoming more deliberate and controlled as the body works to warm the incoming air before it reaches the lungs. Deep, slow breaths prove more effective than rapid, shallow breathing, both for maintaining warmth and for avoiding the sharp pain that can come from breathing extremely cold air too quickly. The moisture in exhaled breath freezes on contact with cold surfaces, creating frost patterns on clothing, beards, and any fabric that covers the mouth or nose. Guards who wrap cloth around their faces to protect against wind and cold find that this moisture accumulation can create problems as the fabric becomes stiff with ice, losing its insulating properties and becoming uncomfortable against the skin. Managing this moisture requires attention and occasional adjustment of face coverings to prevent the buildup of ice that can make breathing difficult. Saliva thickens in extreme cold, and guards learn to be cautious about spitting in freezing temperatures, as the moisture can freeze before it hits the ground, creating small projectiles of ice. The inside of the mouth and throat require time to adjust to breathing extremely cold air, and experienced guards learn to warm the air by breathing through their nose when possible, using the body's natural heating system to moderate the temperature of incoming air. As the night deepens and the cold intensifies, guards turn their attention to the subtle art of managing their body's heat production through controlled movement and positioning. The human body generates heat continuously through metabolism, but this heat can be quickly lost to the environment without proper management. Guards develop repertoires of small, discrete movements that stimulate circulation and heat production without compromising their ability to remain alert and ready to respond to potential threats. Isometric exercises performed by tensing and releasing muscle groups without visible movement provide a way to generate heat while maintaining the stillness that effective watching requires. Guards learn to systematically work through different muscle groups, tensing their leg muscles for several seconds before releasing, then moving to arm muscles, then abdominal muscles, creating a cycle of heat-generating activity that can continue throughout the night. These exercises require no equipment and produce no visible movement that might compromise stealth, yet they can significantly impact overall body temperature and comfort. Foot movements become particularly important during long periods of standing or slow walking. Guards develop techniques for flexing their feet within their boots, curling and extending their toes to maintain circulation in extremities that are particularly vulnerable to cold injury. The simple act of periodically rising onto the toes and then settling back down can stimulate blood flow and prevent the dangerous numbness that indicates the beginning stages of frostbite. Hand and finger exercises serve dual purposes, maintaining dexterity needed for handling weapons and equipment while preventing the loss of sensation that makes fine motor control difficult or impossible. Guards learn to make fists and then extend their fingers, rotate their wrists, and perform other small movements that keep joints flexible and blood flowing to areas that are essential for their duties. These movements can be performed while hands remain inside mittens or gloves, providing the benefits of exercise without exposing skin to direct contact with cold air. The positioning of arms and hands relative to the body affects heat retention in ways that guards learn to appreciate and exploit. Arms held close to the body retain more warmth than arms extended away from the torso. But guards must balance heat conservation with the need to maintain ready access to weapons and equipment. The practice of periodically bringing hands to the armpits or other warm areas of the body provides temporary relief from cold while warming hands enough to maintain dexterity for essential tasks. Shifting weight from one foot to the other serves multiple purposes during long winter watches, preventing the stiffness that comes from holding one position too long while stimulating circulation in legs and feet. This weight shifting can be done almost unconsciously once the rhythm is established, becoming a natural part of the guard's movement pattern that continues throughout the night. The timing of these shifts can be coordinated with other activities, such as scanning different areas of the assigned watch zone, making the movement serve multiple purposes simultaneously. The practice of controlled shivering represents a more advanced technique that some guards develop for generating additional body heat during the coldest periods of their watches. Unlike the uncontrolled shivering that indicates the body is losing the battle against cold, controlled shivering involves deliberately tensing muscles in a rhythmic pattern that generates heat while remaining under conscious control. This technique requires practice to master and should not be confused with the involuntary shivering that signals the need for immediate warming measures. Breathing exercises complement physical movement in maintaining body heat and mental alertness during extended cold exposure. Controlled breathing patterns can influence heart rate and circulation, helping to distribute warm blood throughout the body more effectively. Guards learn breathing rhythms that promote alertness without creating the hyperventilation that can lead to dizziness or reduced effectiveness. The coordination of breathing with movement creates a kind of meditation that helps pass time while providing physiological benefits. The relationship between mental state and physical warmth becomes apparent to guards who spend many nights in cold conditions. Anxiety and fear can cause blood vessels to constrict, reducing circulation to extremities and making the effects of cold more severe. Conversely, maintaining a calm, focused mental state supports better circulation and more effective body heat management. Guards develop mental techniques for managing stress and maintaining the psychological equilibrium that supports physical resilience during challenging conditions. Visualization exercises serve both mental and physical purposes during winter watches. Guards might mentally rehearse warm memories, imagining themselves in comfortable, heated environments while maintaining awareness of their actual surroundings. These mental exercises provide psychological comfort while avoiding the dangerous complete escape from reality that could compromise their duties. The key lies in maintaining dual awareness, enjoying the mental warmth of imagination while keeping sufficient attention on the actual environment to fulfill watch responsibilities effectively. The progression of cold through different parts of the body follows predictable patterns that experienced guards learn to recognize and address before serious problems develop. Extremities cool first, with fingers, toes, and exposed facial features showing the earliest signs of cold stress. Guards who pay attention to these early warning signs can take corrective action before numbness or pain indicates that cold injury is beginning to occur. The core body temperature must be maintained to preserve the function of vital organs, and the body's natural response to cold involves reducing blood flow to less essential areas to protect core temperature. Guards learn to recognize the signs that indicate their body is beginning this protective process, understanding that while it preserves life, it also reduces the function of hands and feet that are essential for their duties. Warming strategies must address both the need to maintain core temperature and the need to preserve function in extremities. Layered clothing systems, already established as essential for winter watch duty, require ongoing management throughout the night as activity levels and external conditions change. Guards learn to make small adjustments to their clothing systems, opening or closing gaps in their layers to regulate heat retention based on current conditions and activity levels. Too much insulation during periods of physical activity can lead to sweating, which creates moisture that will later freeze and compromise warmth. Too little insulation during periods of relative inactivity can allow heat loss that becomes difficult to recover. The timing of clothing adjustments requires attention and experience to master effectively. Guards learn to anticipate their body's needs, making adjustments before they become uncomfortable rather than reacting to problems after they develop. This proactive approach to thermal regulation helps maintain steady comfort levels throughout the night, rather than experiencing cycles of being too warm or too cold. Moisture management within clothing systems becomes increasingly important as the night progresses and the guard's body produces perspiration from physical activity or stress. Even small amounts of moisture can freeze within clothing layers, creating cold spots that conduct heat away from the body and reduce the effectiveness of insulation. guards learn techniques for managing this moisture, including periodic adjustments to ventilation and the strategic removal and replacement of layers when conditions allow. The interaction between different types of fabric in layered clothing systems affects both warmth and moisture management in ways that guards learn to understand and optimize. Linen against the skin wicks moisture away from the body, while wool layers trap warm air and maintain insulation even when slightly damp. Outer layers of treated leather or tightly woven wool provide wind and water resistance while allowing some moisture vapor to escape. Understanding how these materials work together allows guards to make informed decisions about their clothing systems. Footwear systems require particular attention as the night progresses, and guards spend long hours walking or standing on cold surfaces that conduct heat away from their feet. The combination of boots, wrappings, and insulating materials must balance warmth, dryness, and mobility, while providing adequate protection for feet that may need to move quickly over irregular or icy surfaces. Guards learn to adjust their footwear systems throughout the night, changing insulating materials if they become damp or compressed, and ensuring that their feet remain functional for the duration of their duties. The gradual accumulation of small discomforts throughout a long winter watch requires ongoing attention and management to prevent minor issues from becoming major problems. A small area of chafing from poorly fitted clothing can become painful and distracting over the course of many hours. A barely noticeable draft that seems insignificant early in the evening can create genuine cold stress by the end of a long watch. Guards develop sensitivity to these developing problems and learn to address them promptly, rather than hoping they will resolve themselves. Personal comfort items, while limited by the practical constraints of guard duty, can provide disproportionate psychological and physical benefits during extended cold exposure. A small piece of cloth that can be used to wipe moisture from the face, a bit of string that can secure a loose piece of clothing, or a smooth stone that can be warmed by a fire and then carried in a pocket, all represent minimal investments that can significantly improve the experience of winter watch duty. The mental discipline required to maintain effectiveness during long, cold watches extends beyond simply enduring discomfort to include actively managing attention and awareness in conditions that naturally tend to reduce alertness. Cold affects cognitive function, slowing reaction times and reducing the sharpness of mental processes. Guards must compensate for these effects through conscious effort and the development of habits that maintain mental acuity despite physical stress. Attention management becomes a specific skill that guards develop through practice and experience. The natural human tendency during cold stress is to focus inward on personal discomfort, rather than maintaining awareness of the external environment. Guards learn to balance attention between managing their personal condition and fulfilling their primary responsibility of maintaining watch over their assigned areas. This balance requires conscious effort and ongoing adjustment throughout the night. Memory techniques help guards maintain important information despite the cognitive effects of cold exposure. Simple mnemonics, repetitive mental rehearsal of key procedures, and the development of automatic responses to common situations all help ensure that essential knowledge remains accessible even when cold stress reduces mental flexibility. Guards might repeatedly review the locations of keys, the procedures for raising alarms, or the identification of authorized personnel to ensure that this information remains readily available throughout their duties. The development of personal rituals and routines provides structure that supports both mental and physical resilience during challenging watches. These rituals might include specific sequences of equipment checks, particular patterns of movement through assigned areas, or mental exercises performed at regular intervals throughout the night. The familiarity and predictability of these routines provide psychological anchors that help maintain stability and focus during long periods of stress and discomfort. As the deepest part of the night approaches and the cold reaches its most intense levels, guards enter a phase of their watch that requires the highest levels of skill and mental discipline. This period, typically occurring in the hours between midnight and dawn, presents the greatest challenges and the greatest risks for those maintaining solitary vigils in winter conditions. The accumulated effects of hours of cold exposure combine with natural circadian rhythms that promote sleepiness to create conditions that test every aspect of a guard's preparation and determination. The quality of darkness during these deep night hours possesses characteristics that affect both vision and psychology in ways that guards must understand and manage. The absence of any natural light creates a visual environment that strains the eyes and can lead to hallucinations or misperceptions that compromise effectiveness. Guards learn to use their other senses more heavily during these periods, relying on hearing and even smell to supplement limited visual information. The discipline of systematic scanning, moving the eyes in regular patterns rather than staring fixedly at one area, helps maintain visual effectiveness and prevents the eye strain that can lead to headaches and reduced alertness. Sound carries differently through the extremely cold, still air of deep winter nights, traveling farther and with greater clarity than during warmer conditions. Guards develop enhanced sensitivity to the audio landscape of their environment, learning to distinguish between normal sounds and those that might indicate unusual activity. The crunch of footsteps in snow, the creak of leather, the metallic sounds of weapons or tools all become magnified in importance when visual information is limited. Training the ear to pick up these subtle audio cues requires practice and attention, but provides guards with an early warning system that can detect approaching people or animals long before they become visible. The psychological challenges of deep night watches include managing the natural fear responses that darkness and isolation can trigger in even experienced guards. The human mind, deprived of familiar visual landmarks and social contact, can begin to create threats where none exist or fail to recognize actual dangers that require response. Guards develop mental techniques for managing these psychological pressures, including reality-checking procedures that help distinguish between actual perceptions and products of unstressed imagination. Maintaining a connection to reality during long periods of sensory deprivation requires conscious effort and specific techniques. Guards learn to periodically verify their perceptions by using multiple senses, checking visual observations against audio information, or physically investigating sounds or movements that seem unusual. The practice of talking quietly to themselves, describing what they observe or reviewing their duties and procedures helps maintain mental clarity and prevents the kind of mental drift that can lead to reduced effectiveness or dangerous mistakes. The management of fatigue during these crucial hours requires understanding the difference between the natural tiredness that comes from extended wakefulness and the dangerous drowsiness that can lead to falling asleep while on duty. Physical movement, controlled breathing, and mental exercises all help combat fatigue, but guards must also recognize when they are approaching their limits and take appropriate action to maintain alertness. The consequences of falling asleep during a watch extend far beyond personal discomfort to include potential threats to the entire community that depends on their vigilance. Temperature typically reaches its lowest point during the hours just before dawn, creating conditions that test every aspect of a guard's preparation and equipment. The clothing systems, heat management techniques, and shelter arrangements that seemed adequate during the earlier hours of the watch face their ultimate test during this period of maximum cold. Guards learn to prepare for this intensification, conserving resources and energy during the earlier hours, so that they have reserves available when conditions become most challenging. The pre-dawn hours also bring the first subtle signs that the night is beginning its slow retreat toward morning. These signs, invisible to casual observation, become familiar markers that experienced guards learn to recognize and appreciate. The behavior of nocturnal animals begins to change as they prepare for the transition to day. The quality of the air itself shifts in ways that are felt rather than seen, creating a sense of anticipation that helps guards maintain focus during the final, most difficult hours of their watch. Bird activity provides one of the most reliable indicators of approaching dawn, though the first signs appear long before any hint of light becomes visible to human eyes. The movements and calls of owls and other nocturnal hunters change as they prepare to yield the landscape to their diurnal counterparts. Guards who learn to read these subtle behavioral changes gain advance warning of the coming transition, allowing them to prepare mentally and physically for the end of their long vigil. Wind patterns often shift during the pre-dawn hours as temperature differentials change and weather systems reorganize themselves for the coming day. Guards learn to recognize these changes and understand how they might affect the final hours of their watch. A wind shift that brings slightly warmer air can provide welcome relief during the coldest part of the night, while a change that increases wind speed or brings moisture can create new challenges that must be managed with depleted reserves of energy and warmth. The first genuine hints of approaching daylight appear not as visible illumination, but as a gradual change in the quality of darkness itself. The absolute black of deep night begins to soften almost imperceptibly, creating a sense of space and dimension that was absent during the hours of complete darkness. Guards who have spent the entire night in this environment develop sensitivity to these subtle changes, recognizing the approach of dawn long before it would be apparent to someone emerging from the warmth and light of indoor spaces. As these first hints of morning begin to transform the landscape of the winter watch, guards enter the final phase of their long vigil, a period that brings its own unique challenges and rewards. The knowledge that relief is approaching provides psychological support that helps maintain effectiveness during these last crucial hours, while the gradual return of light begins to restore visual capabilities that have been severely limited throughout the night. The successful completion of a winter watch represents an achievement that extends far beyond simple endurance, demonstrating the kind of patient courage and practical wisdom that form the foundation of medieval community security. The transition from night to dawn unfolds with a slowness that matches the measured pace of the entire winter watch, offering guards the opportunity to reflect on the night's experiences while maintaining vigilance until their duties are officially complete. This gradual emergence from the deep, cold, and darkness of the winter night provides its own form of satisfaction, a quiet recognition of challenges met and responsibilities fulfilled despite conditions that tested every aspect of human resilience and determination. As the evening deepens and the techniques of warmth and water become second nature, the guard's attention turns to the subtle rhythms that will carry him through the remaining hours until dawn. The familiar weight of his equipment settles into comfortable patterns, each tool and weapon finding its natural position as he moves through the careful choreography of winter watch duty. These movements, refined through countless nights of practice, create a kind of meditation that helps bridge the gap between the active preparations of early evening and the deeper stillness that will define the hours ahead. The leather of his belt creaks softly as he adjusts the position of his sword, the sound muffled by the thick layers of his winter clothing, but still audible in the profound quiet of the frozen courtyard. Each piece of equipment carries its own weight and balance, contributing to the overall burden that he has learned to distribute across his body in ways that minimize fatigue during the long hours of standing and slow walking that define his duties. The keys that mark his authority jangle quietly when he moves, their metallic voices creating a small music that accompanies his steps across the ice-covered stones. His hands move automatically to check each item in its assigned place, a ritual that serves both practical and psychological purposes. The knife at his belt sits securely in its sheath, the leather wrap that protects the handle from freezing moisture still properly positioned, despite hours of gradual adjustment as his clothing shifted with movement and temperature changes. The small leather pouch that contains his fire-starting materials rests snugly against his hip, its contents protected from the moisture that could render them useless when warmth becomes a matter of survival rather than mere comfort. The process of checking equipment becomes a form of prayer, each familiar object representing security and preparedness in an environment that offers little margin for error. The wooden handle of his staff, worn smooth by the grip of many hands over many winters, provides tactile reassurance that his primary tool remains ready for whatever the night might bring. The metal tip, protected by a leather cap when not in use, stays sharp enough to find purchase on icy surfaces while serving as a weapon if circumstances demand such use. These equipment rituals naturally expand to include the spaces and structures that define his watch area, each element of the physical environment requiring its own form of attention and maintenance throughout the long night. The heavy wooden door that marks the primary entrance to his section of the fortification needs periodic checking, not just for security, but for the practical matter of ensuring that it will open when necessary, despite the accumulation of ice around its frame and hinges. The metal hinges, exposed to the full force of winter weather, attract moisture that freezes and expands, creating resistance that can make doors difficult or impossible to open without proper attention. He learns to work the door periodically throughout his watch, opening and closing it just enough to break up ice formations before they become serious obstacles. The process requires care to avoid creating noise that might alert potential intruders to his presence, but neglecting this maintenance could leave him trapped in his post or unable to pursue someone who breaches the perimeter he is charged with protecting. The wooden bar that secures the door from the inside presents its own challenges in extreme cold. The metal brackets that hold the bar can become so cold that touching them with bare skin creates the risk of frostbite in moments. Yet the bar must be lifted and replaced smoothly and quietly when circumstances require access through the door. He develops techniques for manipulating this heavy barrier while wearing mittens or gloves, understanding that the few seconds required to remove hand protection in extreme cold could cost him the dexterity needed to handle weapons or equipment effectively. Windows, where they exist in his watch area, require different attention entirely. The wooden shutters that provide protection from wind and weather can warp and bind in extreme cold, making them difficult to open for observation or impossible to close if conditions worsen during the night. The leather hinges that support these shutters become stiff and brittle in freezing temperatures, requiring gentle working to maintain flexibility without cracking the material that holds the entire system together. The small gaps between shutter boards, insignificant during warmer weather, become channels for cold air that can transform a sheltered space into an icebox within hours. He learns to stuff these gaps with cloth or other materials that can be quickly removed if the shutters need to be opened, creating temporary seals that make the difference between tolerable and miserable conditions during the coldest hours of his watch. Ice forms on the inside surfaces of windows in patterns that tell stories about temperature, humidity, and air circulation within his post. Thick accumulations of frost indicate areas where warm, moist air meets cold surfaces, creating conditions that can block visibility and reduce the effectiveness of windows for observation. He develops techniques for managing this ice formation, using tools and body heat to clear viewing areas without creating gaps in his defenses that might be observed by potential threats. The stone walls that form the backbone of medieval fortifications present challenges that change throughout the night as temperatures drop and conditions evolve. Mortar joints, the weak points in any stone construction, can crack and crumble when water trapped within them freezes and expands. These small failures, while rarely threatening the structural integrity of massive walls, can create gaps that channel cold air into spaces that should provide shelter from winter weather. He learns to identify these problem areas and develop temporary solutions using available materials. Clay or mud, softened by the warmth of his hands or breath, can be pressed into small gaps to block airflow until permanent repairs can be made during daylight hours. Cloth strips, while less permanent, can be stuffed into larger gaps to provide immediate relief from drafts that make specific areas uninhabitable during extended watches. The accumulation of snow against walls creates insulation that can actually improve the comfort of sheltered areas. But this same snow can also hide potential security problems or create conditions that allow intruders to approach undetected. He develops awareness of how snow affects both the defensive characteristics of his position and the comfort of his watch, learning to take advantage of natural insulation while remaining alert to the ways that changing conditions might compromise his ability to detect threats. Wooden structures within his watch area, from simple lean-to shelters to more elaborate buildings, respond to extreme cold in ways that create both opportunities and challenges for guards seeking to maintain effectiveness throughout long winter nights. The contraction of wooden beams and planks creates gaps that allow cold air to penetrate previously secure spaces, but these same changes can also eliminate squeaks and creaks that might otherwise betray movement to potential intruders. He learns to work with these changes rather than fighting them, understanding that winter transforms familiar spaces in ways that require adaptation rather than resistance. A shelter that provided excellent protection during autumn weather might become a wind tunnel during winter storms, requiring modifications or complete abandonment in favor of alternative positions that offer better protection under changed conditions. The roofing materials that protect his watch post from precipitation present their own spectrum of winter challenges. Thatch, while providing excellent insulation when dry, can become a liability when saturated with melting snow that later freezes into a heavy, ice-laden mass that threatens the structural integrity of the entire shelter. Wooden shingles can warp and separate in extreme cold, creating gaps that allow snow and wind to penetrate previously weatherproof coverings. He develops awareness of how different roofing materials behave in various winter conditions, learning to anticipate problems before they become serious enough to compromise his shelter entirely. The sound of ice forming on thatch differs from the sound of wood expanding and contracting under temperature stress, and these audio cues help him understand what is happening to his shelter, even when visual inspection is impossible in the darkness. Stone tiles, where they are used for roofing, can crack and shift, when the mortar that holds them in place freezes and expands. The sound of a stone tile sliding from its position and shattering on the ground below provides unmistakable warning that the integrity of the roof is being compromised by weather conditions. While he cannot make permanent repairs during his watch, he can take steps to protect himself and his equipment from falling debris, while noting problems that will need attention when daylight and proper materials become available. The management of these physical challenges naturally leads to a deeper understanding of how winter weather affects not just individual elements of his environment, but the complex interactions between different systems that must work together to provide security and shelter. The door that opens easily when the wind comes from one direction might become impossible to close when weather patterns shift and change the air pressure around his post. The window that provides excellent visibility during clear, cold nights might become completely obscured by frost when humidity levels rise or wind patterns change. These interconnections require constant awareness and ongoing adjustment throughout the night. As conditions evolve and the various elements of his environment respond to changing temperatures, wind patterns, and precipitation, the successful winter guard develops an intuitive understanding of these relationships, learning to anticipate how changes in one area will affect conditions throughout his entire watch area. The stone beneath his feet tells its own story throughout the night, its surface changing character as temperature drops and various forms of precipitation accumulate. What begins the evening as merely cold stone gradually transforms into something more treacherous as moisture from his breath, melting snow, and environmental humidity creates increasingly slippery surfaces that require constant attention to navigate safely. The texture of stone changes in extreme cold, becoming somehow sharper and more brittle underfoot. The familiar rough surface that provides secure footing during warmer weather develops a glassy hardness that can turn routine movement into careful navigation, requiring full attention and modified techniques. He learns to read these changes through the soles of his boots, understanding how different types of stone respond to various weather conditions and adjusting his movement patterns accordingly. Sandstone and limestone, common materials in medieval construction, absorb moisture during warmer periods and release it slowly as temperatures drop, creating surfaces that remain treacherous long after visible moisture has frozen or evaporated. Granite and other harder stones shed moisture more quickly, but can become mirror smooth when even thin films of ice form on their surfaces. Understanding these differences helps him choose routes and positions that minimize the risk of falls that could result in injury during hours when help might be far away. The mortar joints between stones create their own microenvironment, often retaining moisture and developing ice formations that persist even when the stone surfaces themselves appear clear. These joints can become channels for water that freezes into ridges and obstacles that catch boot heels and create unexpected hazards in familiar walking routes. He develops awareness of these patterns, learning to step carefully in areas where mortar joints create regular obstacles while moving more confidently across solid stone surfaces that offer more predictable footing. The accumulation of organic matter in the cracks between stones, from fallen leaves to small twigs and other debris, creates pockets where moisture can collect and freeze into hidden patches of ice that remain invisible until discovered by an unwary step. These natural traps require systematic attention, regular clearing of debris from walking surfaces, and the development of movement patterns that test each step before committing full weight to potentially unstable footing. Worn areas in stone surfaces, polished, smooth by countless footsteps over many years, become particularly treacherous in winter conditions. The same wear patterns that indicate heavy traffic and mark the most direct routes between important areas also create surfaces that become impossibly slippery when even small amounts of moisture freeze on their polished surfaces. He learns to avoid these obvious paths during icy conditions, choosing longer routes across rougher stone that provides better traction, even when conditions are less than ideal. The edges and corners of stone steps present particular hazards during winter watches, as ice tends to accumulate in these areas, while remaining nearly invisible in the darkness that defines most of his duties. A step that seems secure when tested with the front of his boot might harbour a thin sheet of ice along its edge that can cause a dangerous slip when his weight shifts during the process of climbing or descending. He develops techniques for testing the entire surface of each step, using his staff to probe areas that his boots cannot safely explore before committing to movements that could result in falls. The sound of his footsteps on stone provides information about surface conditions that helps him navigate safely even when visual information is limited by darkness or weather conditions. The solid thump of boots on dry stone differs markedly from the sharper, more brittle sound of steps on icy surfaces. The muffled quality of footsteps on snow-covered stone provides its own information about the thickness and condition of the snow layer, helping him understand whether he is walking on stable footing or on snow that might conceal ice or other hazards beneath. These audio cues become increasingly important as the night deepens and visual navigation becomes more difficult, requiring him to develop enhanced sensitivity to the subtle differences in sound that indicate changing surface conditions. The slight echo that accompanies footsteps in some areas can help him navigate familiar routes even in complete darkness, while changes in the acoustic environment alert him to obstacles or hazards that might not be visible until he is close enough for them to present immediate danger. The rhythm of his movement across stone surfaces develops into a kind of meditation that helps pass the long hours while maintaining the alertness necessary for effective watch duty. The careful placement of each step, the constant awareness of surface conditions, and the ongoing assessment of potential hazards create a form of moving meditation that engages both body and mind while avoiding the kind of mental wandering that could compromise his effectiveness as a guard. This careful attention to movement naturally extends to awareness of how his passage affects the environment around him, particularly in terms of the sounds and traces that might alert potential intruders to his presence and patterns. The goal becomes moving through his assigned area in ways that maintain security while avoiding the creation of obvious patterns that could be observed and exploited by those who wish to avoid detection. The management of sound during movement requires understanding not just how his boots interact with stone surfaces, but how his clothing, equipment, and breathing contribute to his overall acoustic signature. The jingle of keys, the creak of leather, and the whisper of fabric against fabric all combine to create a sound profile that travels through cold air with surprising clarity and distance. He learns to move in ways that minimize these sounds without compromising his ability to respond quickly to threats or emergencies. The leather of his belt and equipment harnesses requires ongoing attention to prevent the sharp creaking sounds that can develop when leather becomes stiff in extreme cold. The application of small amounts of oil or fat to key stress points can eliminate squeaks and creaks that might otherwise announce his position to anyone listening in the darkness. This maintenance must be balanced against the need to keep his equipment functional and accessible, requiring judgment about which sounds can be eliminated and which must be accepted as necessary consequences of carrying essential gear. The metal components of his equipment, from weapons to keys to buckles and fittings, can create sharp, carrying sounds when they contact each other or strike against stone surfaces. He develops techniques for securing these items to prevent inadvertent contact while maintaining quick access when circumstances require immediate use of specific tools or weapons. The challenge lies in finding methods of securing equipment that prevent noise without creating delays that could prove dangerous in emergency situations. His breathing, visible as clouds of vapor in the extreme cold, creates its own challenges for maintaining concealment during his duties. The rhythm and volume of his breathing can be controlled to some extent, but the visible evidence of his presence cannot be completely eliminated in conditions where exhaled breath immediately condenses in the frigid air. He learns to position himself in ways that minimize the visibility of his breath, while maintaining adequate ventilation to prevent the dangerous buildup of carbon dioxide that can occur in enclosed or poorly ventilated spaces. The coordination of movement, breathing, and equipment management develops into a complex skill set that requires constant practice and refinement throughout the winter season. Each night provides opportunities to improve these techniques while testing them under the demanding conditions that define winter watch duty. The successful integration of these skills creates a foundation of competence and confidence that helps guards maintain effectiveness even during the most challenging weather conditions. As these physical and technical skills become automatic responses rather than conscious efforts, attention can shift to the more subtle aspects of winter watch duty that separate merely competent guards from those who find a kind of austere satisfaction in their demanding work. The development of enhanced sensory awareness, refined judgment about weather and environmental conditions, and the psychological resilience needed to maintain alertness through long hours of cold and isolation, all require their own forms of practice and development. The night continues its slow progression toward dawn, each hour bringing subtle changes in temperature, wind, and the quality of darkness that surrounds the watchful guard. The techniques and skills that seem so important during the early hours of the watch have become second nature, allowing attention to focus on the deeper rhythms and more nuanced challenges that define the heart of winter guard duty. The real test of a guard's preparation and determination still lies ahead. In the hours when cold reaches its most intense levels and the temptation to abandon duty in favor of warmth and comfort becomes strongest. Yet it is precisely during these most challenging hours that the true value of thorough preparation and systematic technique becomes most apparent. The guard who has mastered the practical skills of winter survival and developed the mental discipline necessary for extended cold weather duty finds that even the most demanding conditions can be met with confidence and competence. The long winter night, rather than being an ordeal to be endured, becomes a test of skills and knowledge that can be met with quiet satisfaction and professional pride. Deeper still, we journey into the heart of winter's longest vigil, where time moves like honey poured in cold air, each moment stretching into the next, with the patient rhythm that defines true endurance. The guard who has mastered the essential techniques of survival now enters the realm of subtlety, where small observations and quiet rituals transform mere endurance into something approaching craft. The creak of settling timber echoes through the watchtower as wooden beams contract in the deepening cold. Each sound tells its story to ears grown sensitive through hours of careful listening. The oak beam overhead groans with a voice different from the softer whisper of pine planks underfoot. These sounds, initially startling in their sharpness, become familiar companions that mark the passage of time more reliably than any timepiece. The guard learns to read the wooden voice of his shelter, understanding which sounds indicate normal settling and which might suggest structural stress that requires attention. Between the stone foundation and the wooden superstructure, small gaps appear as materials shrink at different rates. Cold air finds these openings with the persistence of water seeking its level, creating drafts that seem impossibly strong for such tiny spaces. The guard develops an intimate knowledge of these air currents, learning to predict how they will shift as wind direction changes throughout the night. A gap that breathes gently when wind comes from the west becomes a sharp knife of cold air when weather patterns shift and bring Arctic currents from the north. The leather hinges on his equipment pouch stiffen gradually as the night progresses, requiring increasingly deliberate movements to access the tools and supplies secured within. What began as supple, responsive material transforms into something approaching wood, in its resistance to bending and flexing. He learns to work these stiffened materials with patience, applying gentle pressure and allowing body heat to soften the leather enough for necessary adjustments. The process cannot be rushed without risking damage to essential equipment, teaching lessons in patience that extend far beyond simple gear maintenance. Metal buckles and fittings accumulate frost in patterns that reveal the subtle moisture of his breath and the heat radiating from his body. These delicate ice crystals form geometric patterns of surprising beauty when examined closely, each formation unique to the specific combination of temperature, humidity, and air movement that created it. The guard who takes time to observe these small phenomena finds moments of unexpected wonder within the harsh demands of winter duty, discovering that even the most challenging conditions contain elements worthy of appreciation. Cloth wrapped around metal handles prevents the sharp bite of frozen steel against bare skin, but these protective coverings require ongoing attention as moisture from his hands gradually stiffens the fabric into inflexible shells. The balance between protection and dexterity demands constant small adjustments, unwrapping and rewrapping handles as conditions change and the cloth loses its effectiveness. Each rewrapping becomes a small ceremony of maintenance, a moment of focused attention that helps mark the passage of time, while ensuring that essential tools remain usable throughout the long watch. The rhythm of maintenance tasks creates structure within the formless expanse of winter night hours. Oil applied to leather, cloth rewrapped around metal, ice chipped from surfaces where it interferes with function. These small rituals, performed with the deliberate care that cold weather demands, become meditative practices that occupy the hands while leaving the mind free to maintain awareness of the broader environment. The guard discovers that attention to detail serves multiple purposes, maintaining equipment effectiveness while providing the kind of absorbing activity that prevents the mental drift that can compromise alertness. Weapon maintenance takes on particular significance during winter watches when the reliability of arms may mean the difference between successful defense and catastrophic failure. The blade of a sword accumulates moisture from the air and from handling, requiring periodic attention to prevent the formation of rust that could compromise its edge or structural integrity. The process of cleaning and oiling a blade cannot be performed carelessly in extreme cold, as metal becomes more brittle and small mistakes in handling can result in cuts that are both dangerous and difficult to treat in field conditions. The wooden handle of a spear or staff requires its own form of winter care, as the wood can crack or split when moisture trapped within it freezes and expands. The guard learns to examine wooden components regularly, looking for the small signs that indicate developing problems before they become serious enough to compromise the weapon's reliability. Small cracks can be treated with applications of oil or fat, that help seal the wood against moisture penetration, while larger problems may require field repairs using available materials and techniques passed down through generations of guards who understood that their lives might depend on the reliability of their equipment. The leather wrapping on weapon handles serves multiple purposes beyond simple grip improvement, providing insulation that prevents the transfer of heat from warm hands to cold metal, while offering protection against the kind of surface irregularities that can cause blisters during extended use. This wrapping requires periodic adjustment as the leather stretches and shifts with temperature changes and the stress of use. The process of rewrapping a handle becomes an opportunity to examine the weapon thoroughly, checking for damage or wear that might not be apparent during casual inspection. Sharpening tools, when available, must be used with particular care in extreme cold, as both the tools themselves and the weapons being sharpened become more brittle and prone to damage from careless handling. The process requires patience and attention to detail that can be difficult to maintain when hands are stiff with cold and visibility is limited by darkness. Yet the importance of maintaining sharp, reliable weapons provides motivation for the careful attention that effective sharpening requires, and the guard who masters these techniques under challenging conditions develops skills that serve him well throughout his career. The storage and protection of weapons during winter watches requires understanding how different materials respond to extreme cold and moisture. Leather sheaths can freeze stiff enough to make drawing a weapon difficult or impossible, while metal scabbards can accumulate ice that interferes with smooth weapon deployment. The guard learns to manage these challenges through positioning, periodic movement of weapons within their sheaths, and the application of materials that help prevent ice formation, while maintaining the security needed to keep weapons properly secured during normal duties. Canvas wrapped tight around bundles of arrows protects fletching from moisture, while preventing the wooden shafts from warping in the variable humidity that characterizes winter weather. The guard, who relies on archery for defense, learns to rotate his arrows regularly, ensuring that those carried longest receive attention that prevents deterioration that could affect their accuracy or reliability. The process of inspecting arrows provides another structured activity that helps pass time, while ensuring that essential equipment remains ready for immediate use if circumstances demand. The bowstring, perhaps the most vulnerable component of archery equipment during winter conditions, requires protection from moisture and extreme temperature changes that can cause the fibers to stretch, contract, or break at critical moments. Spare strings, carried close to the body where they benefit from warmth and protection from environmental moisture, provide insurance against the failure of primary equipment. The process of changing bowstrings in extreme cold tests both manual dexterity and equipment management skills, requiring techniques that can be performed while wearing protective clothing that limits finger mobility. Fire maintenance evolves from simple fuel management to a complex understanding of how different materials burn under various weather conditions, and how combustion characteristics change as temperatures drop and humidity levels fluctuate. The guard, who tends a small brazier or fire pot throughout the night, learns to read the subtle signs that indicate how his fire is responding to environmental conditions, adjusting fuel types and airflow to maintain steady heat output while conserving precious combustible materials. Different types of wood burn with characteristics that become important during extended winter watches, when fuel conservation may determine whether warmth remains available throughout the entire period of duty. Hardwoods like oak and ash burn slowly and produce steady heat, but can be difficult to ignite in extreme cold. Softwoods like pine ignite more easily and burn with brighter flames, but consume fuel more quickly and produce less sustained heat. The experienced guard learns to combine different wood types strategically, using easily ignited materials to establish his fire, and then maintaining it with slower burning fuels that provide consistent warmth throughout the night. The preparation of kindling becomes an art form, practiced by guards who understand that their ability to maintain or restart fires may depend on having properly prepared materials available when needed. Small wood shavings, created during quiet periods of the watch using knives or other cutting tools, provide tinder that ignites easily even in challenging conditions. These shavings must be kept dry and protected from wind that could scatter them before they can be used effectively, requiring containers or wrappings that shield them from environmental moisture while keeping them easily accessible. Charcoal, when available, provides advantages during winter watches that make it worth the additional effort required for preparation and transport. Charcoal burns hotter than wood while producing less smoke and flame, making it ideal for situations where heat is needed, but visibility and stealth must be maintained. The process of making charcoal requires advanced planning and specialized techniques, but guards who master these skills can create fuel that burns efficiently while producing minimal evidence of their presence to potential observers. The management of fire during windy conditions requires understanding how air currents affect combustion and how different types of windbreaks can protect flames while maintaining adequate airflow for proper burning. A fire that burns steadily in calm air may gutter and die when wind patterns change, leaving the guard without heat during crucial hours of the watch. Techniques for shielding fires from wind while maintaining combustion efficiency become essential skills for guards who work in exposed positions where weather conditions can change rapidly throughout the night. Banking fires for extended burning involves covering active coals with ash, sand, or other materials that restrict airflow enough to slow combustion while preventing complete extinction of the flames. This technique allows guards to maintain fires throughout long periods when they cannot give direct attention to fuel management, but it requires understanding how different covering materials affect burn rates and heat output. A properly banked fire can provide warmth for hours with minimal attention, while remaining ready to flare back to full output when additional fuel is added. The collection and preparation of alternative fuels becomes necessary when traditional wood supplies are limited or unavailable during extended winter conditions. Dried animal dung, though less pleasant to handle than wood, burns well and produces substantial heat when properly prepared and dried. Certain types of dried vegetation, from reed grasses to woody shrubs, can supplement wood fires while providing different burning characteristics that may be advantageous under specific conditions. Fat and oil, when available, can extend the burning time of wood fires while increasing heat output and providing fuel that burns even when dampened by moisture that would extinguish purely wood fires. The addition of small amounts of animal fat to a wood fire creates flames that burn hotter and longer while producing light that may be valuable for detailed work or observation during the darkest hours of the watch. The positioning of fires within watch posts requires balancing multiple considerations, including heat distribution, light control, ventilation, and safety. A fire placed too close to wooden structures creates risks of accidental ignition that could destroy the guard's shelter and compromise his safety. A fire positioned too far from the guard fails to provide adequate warmth during the coldest hours, when heat is most desperately needed. The optimal position depends on wind patterns, structural materials, and specific duties that the guard must perform during his watch. Ventilation management becomes crucial when fires are used in enclosed or partially enclosed spaces, where smoke accumulation could create dangerous conditions for the guard. The products of combustion must be allowed to escape while heat is retained and cold air infiltration is minimized. This balance requires understanding how air moves through structures and how different ventilation configurations affect both air quality and heat retention within guard posts. The psychological effects of fire extend beyond simple warmth to include the comfort that comes from light and the primitive satisfaction of maintaining control over one of humanity's most fundamental technologies. The guard who successfully maintains fire throughout a challenging winter watch experiences a form of accomplishment that connects him to countless generations of humans who have used fire to survive in hostile environments. This connection provides psychological strength that helps maintain morale during the most difficult hours of winter duty. Light management involves more than simply maintaining fires for illumination, extending to understanding how different types of light affect night vision and how illumination can be controlled to provide adequate visibility for essential tasks while avoiding the creation of beacons that might attract unwanted attention. The guard learns to work with minimal light when stealth is important, and to maximize illumination when detailed tasks require clear vision, developing techniques for rapidly adjusting light levels based on changing tactical requirements. Candles, when available, provide controlled light sources that can be easily shielded or extinguished as circumstances require. The process of making candles from available materials becomes a valuable skill for guards who understand that reliable light sources may be essential for performing duties that require fine motor control or detailed observation. Tallow candles, made from animal fat, burn with steady flames that provide both light and modest amounts of heat, while consuming materials that might otherwise be unavailable for fuel purposes. Oil lamps offer advantages over candles in terms of fuel efficiency and light control, but they require different materials and maintenance techniques that must be mastered for effective use during winter watches. The wicks used in oil lamps require periodic trimming and adjustment to maintain proper flame characteristics, while the oil itself must be protected from freezing in extreme cold that could render the entire system unusable when light is most needed. Reflective surfaces, from polished metal to carefully positioned stones, can be used to direct and concentrate light from fires or lamps, increasing illumination in specific areas while conserving fuel that would otherwise be required to achieve similar light levels. The guard who understands these techniques can maximize the effectiveness of limited light sources while creating illumination patterns that serve his specific needs during different phases of his watch duties. The coordination of light and fire management with other aspects of winter watch duty requires planning and practice that develops over multiple nights of experience under various conditions. The guard learns to anticipate his needs for light and heat throughout the watch, preparing materials and positioning equipment in ways that allow rapid response to changing conditions without compromising his primary security responsibilities. You imagine the satisfaction that comes from mastering these ancient skills, from successfully maintaining warmth and light throughout a long winter night, using techniques that connect you to generations of guards who face similar challenges with similar tools and materials. The knowledge that you have developed competence in fundamental survival skills provides confidence that extends beyond the immediate circumstances of guard duty to encompass a broader understanding of human adaptability and resourcefulness in the face of environmental challenges. The integration of fire management with other aspects of winter guard duty creates a complex web of interconnected skills and knowledge that must be balanced and coordinated throughout the long hours of darkness. The guard who achieves mastery of these techniques discovers that winter watch duty rather than being an ordeal to be endured, becomes an opportunity to practice and refine skills that connect him to the deepest traditions of human survival and adaptation. As the night progresses and these various skills become automatic responses rather than conscious efforts, attention shifts naturally to the more subtle aspects of winter watch duty that define the difference between mere competence and true mastery. The development of enhanced awareness, refined judgment about environmental conditions, and the psychological resilience needed to find satisfaction rather than misery in demanding conditions all require their own forms of practice and development. The pre-dawn hours approach with their own particular challenges and rewards, testing every aspect of the guard's preparation while offering the first hints that the long vigil is approaching its successful completion. The techniques of survival and the skills of winter watch duty, now thoroughly integrated into unconscious competence, provide the foundation for meeting these final challenges with confidence and professional satisfaction that comes from duties properly performed under the most demanding conditions that winter can provide. In the same slow breath of night, the guard finds his awareness settling into deeper rhythms, his body and mind now fully adapted to the ancient dialogue between human endurance and winter's patient testing. The skills that seemed so demanding hours ago have become as natural as breathing, leaving space for subtler observations and the quiet satisfaction that comes from meeting harsh conditions with competence earned through careful attention to detail. The sound of his own heartbeat becomes audible in the profound stillness, a steady percussion that marks time more reliably than any bell tower in the distance. Each pulse carries warmth through his body, a reminder of the life force that sustains him through these long hours when the world seems frozen into absolute stillness. The rhythm synchronizes gradually with his breathing, creating an internal music that helps maintain the meditative alertness essential for effective watch duty. Between heartbeats, the silence stretches so completely that he can hear the whisper of snow settling on stone surfaces, each tiny crystal finding its place in the growing accumulation that transforms familiar landmarks into softer, more mysterious shapes. His ears, grown sensitive through hours of careful listening, detect the distant sound of water moving beneath ice, a liquid murmur that speaks of streams and springs that continue their ancient work even when their surfaces have surrendered to winter's grip. The sound carries promise, a reminder that beneath the frozen stillness, life continues its patient processes, waiting for spring's return to emerge once again into visible activity. Sometimes the sound grows louder as wind shifts and carries it more clearly across the frozen landscape, while other times it fades until he wonders if he imagined it entirely, leaving only the memory of flowing water in a world where everything visible has turned to ice and stone. The wooden staff that has been his constant companion throughout the watch reveals new characteristics as the night deepens and cold penetrates even the most carefully protected equipment. The grain of the wood becomes more pronounced under his grip. Ridges and valleys that were barely noticeable in warmer conditions now standing out clearly enough to read with fingertips through his protective wrappings. Each ring in the wood tells its story of seasons past, years when this oak tree grew in soil and sunlight, accumulating the strength that now serves human purposes in conditions far removed from the forest where it once stood. The metal tip, protected by its leather covering when not in active use, has absorbed enough cold to become dangerous to unprotected skin, yet it remains an essential tool for testing ice thickness and maintaining secure footing on treacherous surfaces. The leather that shields this metal point has stiffened into something approaching horn in its hardness, requiring gentle working with warm fingers to maintain the flexibility needed for quick removal when circumstances demand immediate use of the staff as a weapon or tool. The contrast between the warming wood and the bitter cold of metal demonstrates the different ways that various materials respond to extreme conditions, lessons that extend far beyond simple equipment maintenance to encompass broader understanding of how the physical world behaves under stress. Wrapped around the staff's handle, strips of cloth provide insulation that prevents the direct transfer of cold from wood to skin, while offering improved grip during the careful movements that winter conditions demand. These wrappings, dampened by moisture from his hands and then frozen into stiffness, require periodic adjustment and rewrapping as the night progresses and conditions change. The process of unwinding and rewinding these protective strips becomes a small ritual that helps mark the passage of time while ensuring that his primary tool remains both comfortable and functional throughout the long hours of darkness. The leather pouch secured to his belt carries the small items that might mean the difference between success and failure during emergency situations. But accessing these materials requires increasingly deliberate movements as the leather stiffens and the metal fastenings accumulate frost that interferes with smooth operation. Inside this pouch, wrapped in oiled cloth to protect them from moisture, rest the fire-starting materials that could restore warmth if his primary heat source fails during the coldest hours of the watch. The flint and steel, though simple in concept, demand skill and patience to use effectively when hands are stiff with cold and kindling must be coaxed into flame under challenging conditions. Small pieces of charred cloth, prepared during daylight hours when such work could be done with proper attention to detail, provide tinder that catches sparks reliably, even when dampened by the humidity that characterizes winter air. These precious scraps of prepared material represent foresight and planning, the kind of advanced preparation that separates successful guards from those who struggle needlessly through their duties. The knowledge that reliable fire-starting materials remain available provides psychological comfort that extends beyond their practical utility, offering reassurance that warmth can be restored even if current heat sources fail unexpectedly. Checking equipment becomes a meditative process that unfolds without conscious direction, hands moving automatically through familiar patterns, while the mind remains free to maintain awareness of the broader environment. Each tool finds its proper position, each strap settles into its accustomed arrangement, each weapon rests securely, while remaining instantly accessible if circumstances demand immediate action. The repetition of these checks throughout the night serves multiple purposes, ensuring equipment readiness while providing the kind of absorbing activity that prevents the mental drift that could compromise alertness during the long hours when nothing visible seems to change in the frozen landscape surrounding his post. The rhythm of equipment maintenance creates structure within time that might otherwise seem endless, breaking the night into manageable segments marked by familiar tasks that require attention without demanding intense concentration. Oil applied to leather prevents cracking that could compromise the integrity of straps and sheaths. Moisture wiped from metal surfaces prevents the rust that could dull blade edges or interfere with the smooth operation of buckles and fittings. Each small act of maintenance represents an investment in future effectiveness, ensuring that equipment will function properly when needed, while providing immediate occupation for hands that might otherwise grow stiff from inactivity. The process of inventory, conducted primarily through touch rather than sight in the darkness that defines most winter watch duty, reinforces familiarity with essential gear while confirming that nothing has been lost or damaged during the night's activities. Fingers trace the outline of knife handle, confirming proper seating in its sheath. Hands verify the position of keys, ensuring they remain accessible while staying secure against loss. The systematic checking of each item becomes a form of prayer, each familiar object representing security and preparedness in an environment that offers little margin for error or oversight. Methodical cleaning of metal surfaces removes the frost and moisture that accumulate throughout the night, preventing the gradual deterioration that could compromise equipment effectiveness over time. The cloth used for this cleaning, kept relatively dry through careful protection from environmental moisture, absorbs the thin films of ice that form on exposed metal, while distributing the small amounts of oil that help prevent corrosion. The process requires patience and attention to detail that can be difficult to maintain when hands are stiff and visibility is limited, yet the importance of maintaining reliable equipment provides motivation for the careful work that effective maintenance requires. Sharpening stones, when available and when conditions permit their use, allow guards to maintain the keen edges that may prove essential during emergency situations. The process of honing a blade in extreme cold requires modified techniques that account for the increased brittleness of both the blade being sharpened and the tools used for sharpening. Each stroke of stone against steel must be controlled carefully to avoid the kind of aggressive cutting that might chip or damage blades that have become more fragile in the intense cold. The sound of sharpening carries clearly through the still air, requiring guards to balance the need for sharp weapons against the potential for unwanted noise that might reveal their presence to observers. The systematic inspection of wooden components reveals the subtle changes that extreme cold creates in organic materials, from the slight checking that appears in handles as wood contracts to the way that grain patterns become more pronounced as moisture migrates within the cellular structure of the wood. Understanding these changes helps guards anticipate potential equipment failures before they occur, allowing preventive measures that maintain functionality throughout the demanding conditions of winter watch duty. Small applications of oil or fat can seal minor cracks before they propagate into serious structural problems, while recognition of more significant damage allows time to develop alternative approaches before critical equipment fails completely. Leather components require their own specialized attention as the material responds to extreme cold by becoming increasingly stiff and brittle, losing the flexibility that makes leather useful for equipment applications. The careful application of body heat, combined with small amounts of oil or fat when available, can restore some flexibility to leather that has become too stiff for proper function. The process requires patience and gentle handling to avoid cracking or tearing materials that have become fragile in the cold. Yet the investment of time and effort can restore functionality to equipment that might otherwise become useless during the hours when it is most needed. Textile components, from the cloth wrappings that protect metal handles to the fabric elements of clothing systems, accumulate moisture throughout the night that can freeze into rigid forms that interfere with both comfort and function. Managing this moisture requires ongoing attention and periodic adjustment of these soft goods, unwrapping and rewrapping as conditions change and materials lose their effectiveness. The balance between protection and functionality demands constant small decisions about when to adjust equipment and when to accept temporary discomfort in favor of maintaining readiness for more important challenges. Cleaning and organizing these various components creates opportunities for the detailed observation that reveals potential problems before they become serious enough to compromise safety or effectiveness. The guard who takes time to examine his equipment thoroughly during quiet periods of the watch develops familiarity that allows rapid assessment of functionality even under stressful conditions when detailed inspection might not be possible. This knowledge becomes particularly valuable during emergency situations when equipment must function properly on the first attempt, with no opportunity for adjustment or repair. The integration of equipment maintenance with other aspects of winter watch duty requires planning that balances the need for thorough care of essential gear with the primary responsibility of maintaining security over assigned areas. Tasks must be performed in ways that allow continued awareness of the surrounding environment, while providing adequate attention to equipment that may prove critical during emergency situations. The successful guard learns to coordinate these activities, performing maintenance tasks during periods when threat levels are lowest, while remaining ready to abandon such work immediately if circumstances demand full attention to security responsibilities. Arranging tools and weapons in consistent patterns helps ensure that essential items can be located quickly, even in complete darkness or during stressful situations when normal thought processes might be compromised by adrenaline or fear. The muscle memory that develops from repeatedly placing items in specific locations creates automatic responses that function even when conscious thought is focused on other priorities. This organization extends beyond simple convenience to encompass tactical considerations, positioning weapons and tools in arrangements that facilitate rapid access while preventing interference between different pieces of equipment during emergency situations. The psychological benefits of maintaining clean, well-organized equipment extend beyond practical considerations to include the confidence and sense of professional competence that comes from knowing that tools and weapons are ready for immediate use. The guard who has invested time and effort in proper equipment maintenance approaches his duties with assurance that his gear will perform as expected when needed, reducing anxiety and allowing mental energy to focus on observation and decision-making, rather than concern about equipment reliability. This confidence becomes particularly important during the most challenging hours of winter watches when environmental stress already places significant demands on mental and physical resources. Documentation of equipment condition, conducted through mental notes rather than written records that would be difficult to maintain in darkness and cold, helps guards track the gradual changes that occur over multiple watches and plan for maintenance or replacement needs before equipment failures compromise safety. Understanding how different pieces of gear respond to extended exposure to winter conditions allows better preparation for future watches and more effective allocation of maintenance time during periods when such work can be performed under more favorable conditions. The relationship between equipment condition and overall mission effectiveness becomes clear to guards who experience the consequences of inadequate preparation or maintenance during challenging conditions. Equipment failures that might represent minor inconveniences during normal weather can become serious problems during winter watches when alternative solutions may not be readily available. The investment of time and attention in proper equipment care pays dividends in reliability and effectiveness that extend throughout the winter season and beyond into future assignments under similar conditions. Walking becomes a form of meditation as footsteps find their rhythm on surfaces transformed by ice and snow into landscapes that require constant attention and careful navigation. Each step tests the ground ahead, probing for secure footing before committing full weight to potentially treacherous surfaces that might betray the unwary, with painful falls onto unforgiving stone. The sound of boots on different surfaces tells stories about conditions underfoot, from the solid thump of steps on dry stone to the sharper crack of breaking through thin ice to the muffled whisper of movement through accumulated snow. The pattern of his route becomes as familiar as the rhythm of his heartbeat, each turn and straightaway, known through countless repetitions that have worn the path into muscle memory. Yet winter conditions transform even the most familiar routes into new challenges. As ice conceals familiar landmarks and snow drifts alter the geometry of passages that seem permanently fixed in stone and mortar. The guard learns to navigate these transformed spaces while maintaining the regular patrol patterns that ensure complete coverage of his assigned area, adapting his movements to change conditions while preserving the systematic observation that effective security requires. Pausing at specific observation points allows systematic scanning of areas that might harbor threats or reveal changes in conditions that require attention. These stops break the rhythm of walking while providing opportunities for detailed examination of terrain that might appear unchanged during casual observation, but reveal important information when studied with the focused attention that winter conditions demand. The accumulation of snow in unusual patterns might indicate wind changes that could affect comfort and visibility during later hours of the watch. Ice formation in areas that normally remain clear might suggest changes in drainage or structural problems that warrant investigation during daylight hours. The coordination of movement with breathing creates efficiency that conserves energy while maintaining the steady pace that allows complete coverage of assigned areas within the time constraints that define effective patrol patterns. Deep, regular breathing supports the sustained effort that winter navigation requires, while providing the oxygen needed for mental alertness during periods of physical exertion. The visible breath that marks each exhalation in the frigid air provides a rhythm that coordinates naturally with the cadence of footsteps, creating a unified pattern of movement and respiration that can continue for hours without creating excessive fatigue. Direction changes require particular attention when ice and snow make sudden movements dangerous and potentially injurious. The guard learns to anticipate turns and stops, beginning the process of changing direction gradually rather than attempting sharp pivots that might result in loss of footing on slippery surfaces. This deliberate approach to navigation extends the time required to complete patrol routes, but provides the safety margin necessary for effective movement in conditions where falls could result in serious injury during hours when help might not be immediately available. The mental mapping that develops through repeated navigation of the same routes under varying conditions creates spatial awareness that functions even when familiar landmarks are obscured by snow or altered by ice formation. This internal compass allows navigation in near-complete darkness, while providing the confidence needed for movement over terrain that might seem treacherous to someone unfamiliar with its normal characteristics. The guard who has walked the same paths through multiple seasons understands how winter transforms familiar spaces while retaining knowledge of the underlying geography that remains constant despite surface changes. Rest periods, taken at strategic locations that provide both security and shelter from the worst effects of wind and weather, offer opportunities for the body to recover from the sustained effort that winter navigation requires, while maintaining the alertness needed for effective observation. These breaks must be carefully timed and positioned to avoid creating predictable patterns that might be observed and exploited by potential intruders. Yet they provide essential relief from the physical demands of extended movement in challenging conditions. The selection of rest positions requires balancing multiple considerations, including visibility, protection from environmental factors, and tactical advantages that might prove important if threats materialize during periods of reduced mobility. A position that offers excellent shelter from wind might provide poor sight lines for observation, while a location with superior visibility might expose the guard to weather conditions that quickly become unbearable during extended stops. The experienced guard learns to identify locations that offer acceptable compromises between these competing requirements, while remaining flexible enough to adapt to changing conditions throughout the night. During these rest periods, attention shifts from the demands of movement to the subtler requirements of stationary observation, allowing different sensory capabilities to assume primary importance in maintaining awareness of the surrounding environment. Hearing becomes more acute when not masked by the sounds of footsteps and equipment movement, while vision adapts to the challenge of detecting movement or changes in areas that might appear static during casual observation. The transition between mobile and stationary phases of watch duty requires conscious adjustment of attention and awareness patterns to maintain effectiveness in both modes of operation. Recovery techniques employed during rest periods to maintain physical condition and prepare for continued movement include gentle stretching exercises that can be performed without creating visible movement that might compromise concealment. These exercises focus on muscle groups that experience the greatest stress during winter navigation, particularly the legs and feet that bear the primary burden of movement over irregular and potentially dangerous surfaces. The warming effects of controlled muscle activity help maintain circulation in extremities while preparing the body for resumed movement when rest periods end. Observation during stationary periods allows detailed examination of areas that might receive only casual attention during mobile phases of patrol duty, revealing information about environmental conditions and potential security concerns that could affect the remainder of the watch. Changes in wind patterns become more apparent when not moving through them, while subtle sounds that might be masked by movement noise become audible during periods of stillness. The systematic use of these stationary observation periods enhances overall situational awareness while providing physical recovery that supports continued effectiveness throughout the long hours of winter watch duty. The balance between rest and continued vigilance requires discipline and judgment that develop through experience with the physical demands of winter watch duty and understanding of the security requirements that define the guard's primary responsibilities. Rest periods that extend too long or occur too frequently can compromise coverage of assigned areas, while insufficient rest can lead to fatigue that reduces effectiveness during critical periods when alertness is most important. The successful guard learns to gauge his physical condition accurately and time rest periods to maximize recovery while maintaining the security posture that his duties require. Returning to movement after rest periods requires gradual reactivation of muscles and joints that may have stiffened during periods of reduced activity in cold conditions. The transition from stationary to mobile phases of watch duty must be managed carefully to avoid injury from sudden movements that cold stiffened tissues might not accommodate without damage. This warming process can usually be accomplished through gentle movements that gradually increase in range and intensity until normal mobility is restored and safe navigation can resume. The integration of rest periods with other aspects of winter watch duty, including equipment maintenance and environmental observation, creates opportunities for accomplishing multiple objectives simultaneously while maximizing the efficiency of limited time and energy resources. A rest stop that includes systematic equipment checks serves dual purposes while providing the kind of detailed activity that helps maintain mental alertness during periods when environmental stimulation might be limited. The coordination of these various activities requires planning and practice, but results in more effective use of the time available during long winter watches. Shadows shift imperceptibly as the night progresses. Subtle changes in the quality of darkness that mark the slow passage of hours toward the eventual return of daylight. These variations, invisible to untrained eyes, become significant markers for guards who have learned to read the night's progression through accumulated experience with the gradual transformation that occurs between sunset and dawn. The absolute blackness of deep night gradually softens into something less complete, a change so subtle that it might be imagined rather than observed, yet consistent enough to provide reliable indication that the longest hours of darkness are slowly yielding to the approach of morning. The behavior of nocturnal creatures provides more reliable indicators of time's passage, as animals that are active during early evening hours gradually yield the soundscape to different species that emerge during the deepest parts of the night. Owls call with voices that carry clearly through the cold air, their hunting patterns creating audio landscapes that change predictably as the night progresses, and different prey species alter their activity levels in response to temperature and predator pressure. The guard who learns to interpret these natural rhythms gains insight into the night's progression that extends beyond simple timekeeping to encompass broader understanding of the environment that surrounds his post. Wind patterns evolve throughout the night as temperature differences shift and weather systems move across the landscape, creating changes in air movement that affect both comfort and tactical considerations for guards maintaining exposed positions. A breeze that provides welcome relief from stagnant cold air during early evening hours might strengthen into a cutting wind that makes continued exposure dangerous during the coldest pre-dawn period. Understanding these patterns allows guards to anticipate changing conditions and adjust their positions and preparations accordingly, maintaining effectiveness while minimizing unnecessary exposure to the most severe weather. The accumulation of frost and ice continues steadily throughout the night, gradually transforming surfaces and creating new obstacles that must be navigated with increasing care as familiar routes become progressively more treacherous. What begins as a light coating of slippery moisture on stone surfaces develops into substantial ice formations that can make routine movement genuinely dangerous for guards who must continue their duties regardless of deteriorating conditions. The progression of this ice formation provides another marker of time's passage while creating practical challenges that require ongoing attention and adaptation. Temperature drops steadily as the night advances, reaching its lowest point during the hours just before dawn, when the accumulated effects of radiative cooling create conditions that test every aspect of the guard's preparation and endurance. Clothing systems that seemed adequate during earlier hours face their ultimate challenge during this period of maximum cold, while equipment that functioned properly throughout most of the night may begin to show the effects of prolonged exposure to extreme conditions. The successful navigation of this most challenging period requires not only proper preparation, but also the psychological resilience needed to maintain effectiveness when conditions become genuinely difficult. Moisture management becomes increasingly critical as the night progresses, and the guard's body continues to produce perspiration from physical activity, while environmental conditions make it increasingly difficult to prevent the accumulation of dampness within clothing systems. Even small amounts of moisture can freeze within insulating layers, creating cold spots that compromise the effectiveness of carefully constructed thermal protection systems. The balance between maintaining warmth and preventing dangerous moisture buildup requires ongoing attention and periodic adjustment of clothing configurations as conditions change throughout the night. Breathing patterns adapt naturally to the increasingly cold air, becoming more controlled and deliberate as the body works to warm incoming air before it reaches the lungs. The visible clouds of vapor that mark each exhalation grow more pronounced as temperature differences increase, creating potential concealment issues for guards who must balance the need to breathe normally with tactical requirements that might demand minimal visible signature during certain phases of their duties. The coordination of breathing with other activities becomes more conscious as conditions intensify, and every aspect of physical function requires greater attention to maintain effectiveness. Fuel consumption for fires and other heat sources accelerates as temperatures drop, and the demand for warmth increases beyond the capabilities of clothing and shelter alone. Guards who have carefully managed their fuel supplies throughout the early hours of the watch must make increasingly difficult decisions about resource allocation as the night progresses and the cold intensifies. The knowledge that fuel must last until dawn creates pressure to conserve resources while maintaining adequate warmth for continued effectiveness, requiring judgment that balances immediate needs against future requirements. The psychological challenge of enduring the coldest hours of the watch requires mental techniques that go beyond simple determination to encompass active management of thoughts and attention in ways that support continued function despite increasingly difficult conditions. The natural human response to severe cold includes mental effects that can reduce judgment and decision-making capability, requiring conscious effort to maintain the cognitive function needed for effective security duties. Guards develop strategies for preserving mental clarity while managing the stress that comes from prolonged exposure to conditions that challenge the body's ability to maintain normal function. Hope becomes an active practice rather than a passive emotion, as guards work to maintain confidence in their ability to complete their duties successfully, despite conditions that might seem overwhelming to someone without proper preparation and experience. The knowledge that dawn will eventually arrive provides a psychological anchor that helps maintain motivation during the hours when immediate conditions offer little comfort or encouragement. This hope, grounded in practical understanding of the night's natural progression, rather than wishful thinking, becomes a tool that supports continued effectiveness when purely physical resources begin to approach their limits. The development of personal rituals and mental exercises that help maintain focus and motivation during the most challenging hours creates internal resources that supplement physical preparation and equipment in meeting the demands of winter watch duty. These techniques, developed through experience and adapted to individual needs and preferences, provide psychological tools that can make the difference between successful completion of duties and failure when conditions become genuinely testing of human capabilities. The first pale suggestion of dawn arrives not as light, but as a subtle shift in the quality of darkness itself, a softening so gradual that it might be imagined rather than observed. The guard who has maintained his vigil through the deepest hours of winter night feels this change before he sees it, sensing in the air itself a loosening of winter's absolute grip. The stars that have been his distant companions throughout the long watch begin their slow retreat, not fading, but somehow becoming less necessary as the world prepares for its daily transformation from night to morning. His breath still rises in visible clouds, each exhalation marking the rhythm of survival that has carried him through hours when the cold seemed absolute and unforgiving. Yet now, there is something different in the quality of that breath, a sense that the worst has passed, and that warmth, though still hours away, has begun its inevitable return to the world. The techniques that seemed so crucial during the darkest hours, the careful management of water and warmth, the systematic attention to shelter and clothing, have become as natural as breathing itself, no longer conscious efforts, but integrated responses to conditions that once seemed overwhelming. The leather of his equipment, stiff with cold throughout the long night, begins to show the first hints of returning flexibility as temperature starts its slow climb toward dawn. The metal fittings that accumulated frost in intricate patterns now release that moisture in tiny droplets that catch what little light exists in the pre-dawn world. Each small change marks progress toward morning and relief, yet the guard, who has found his rhythm in the darkness, feels no desperate eagerness for the watch to end. Only quiet satisfaction in duties properly performed, under conditions that tested every aspect of his preparation and resolve. Stone walls, that radiated cold throughout the night, begin their gradual transition toward neutrality, no longer actively stealing warmth from everything they touch, but simply existing as the solid foundations upon which human security depends. The mortar joints that channeled icy drafts through the darkest hours seem less aggressive now, as if winter itself has begun to acknowledge that its absolute dominion over the landscape must eventually yield to other forces. The guard runs his hand along familiar stone surfaces and feels not the sharp bite of extreme cold, but merely the coolness of materials that have survived another night and will survive countless more. His footsteps on ice-covered stones create sounds that seem somehow different now, less sharp and brittle, more like the normal percussion of boot leather against solid surfaces that will soon remember what warmth feels like. The treacherous patches that demanded such careful navigation throughout the night remain dangerous, but they no longer seem to possess the malevolent quality that made every step a conscious decision during the hours when cold ruled absolutely. Ice is still ice, stone is still stone, but the relationship between guard and environment has subtly shifted, as both have proven their ability to endure what winter could offer. The small fire that has been his companion through the long hours burns with flames that seem brighter now, not because more fuel feeds the flames, but because the contrast between fire and surrounding darkness has begun to lessen as the world prepares for light's return. The smoke rises more steadily, no longer whipped and scattered by the fierce winds that characterize the deepest part of the night. Even the simple act of adding fuel to maintain the flames feels different, less desperate and more routine, as if the fire too understands that its role as the primary source of warmth and comfort will soon be supplemented by the returning sun. Water, drawn from sources that seemed impossibly distant and difficult during the coldest hours, flows more freely now as ice begins its gradual retreat from the edges of wells and streams. The process of breaking through ice to reach liquid water below requires less effort, fewer blows of metal against frozen surfaces that have started to yield to forces larger than winter's temporary grip. The guard drinks and feels not just the physical satisfaction of hydration, but the deeper knowledge that he has successfully navigated challenges that might have seemed insurmountable when viewed from the comfort of warm rooms and daylight hours. The clothing that has been his armor against winter's assault settles more comfortably now. Layers that seemed bulky and restrictive during the active phases of the night, now feeling like natural extensions of his own body's warmth, generating systems. Wool that trapped air and held heat, linen that managed moisture and provided foundation, leather that shed wind and offered protection, all continue their essential functions, but with less urgency now that the worst demands have been met and overcome. The guard adjusts his layers, not in response to crisis, but in preparation for the gradual warming that dawn will bring. Equipment that required constant attention throughout the night to prevent failure in extreme conditions now seems more reliable, more trustworthy, as if the testing of the coldest hours has proven the adequacy of preparation and the soundness of techniques passed down through generations of guards who faced similar challenges with similar tools and methods. The sword rests securely in its sheath, the keys hang properly from their ring, the staff maintains its balance and strength, all ready for continued service, but no longer demanding the anxious attention that extreme conditions require. The silence that surrounded him during the deepest hours of night begins to fill with the subtle sounds that herald morning's approach. Not yet the songs of birds or the stirring of human activity, but smaller sounds that indicate life's persistence through winter's trial. The movement of small creatures that have survived the night, the settling of structures as temperature begins its slow rise, the distant whisper of wind that carries different qualities now that the worst cold has passed. These sounds, barely audible but definitely present, create a soundscape that speaks of survival and continuance, rather than the stark endurance that defined the darker hours. Memory holds the night's experiences not as a trial survived, but as knowledge gained, understanding earned through direct experience of conditions that reveal human capability when properly prepared and thoughtfully applied. The techniques of warmth management, the skills of winter navigation, the mental discipline required for long watches in challenging conditions, all have become part of his accumulated wisdom, tools that will serve him through future winters and challenges yet to come. What seemed difficult has become familiar. What appeared threatening has been revealed as manageable through proper attention and systematic response. The pre-dawn world holds a quality of peace that differs from the tense alertness required during the night's most challenging hours. This is not the peace of completion, but the deeper satisfaction of competence proven under demanding conditions, of human resourcefulness tested against winter's power and found adequate to the challenge. The guard who has maintained his watch through the long cold hours stands not as a survivor of ordeal, but as a practitioner of ancient skills that connect him to countless others who have found ways to thrive in conditions that might seem impossible to those who have never tested their capabilities against such challenges. The approaching dawn promises not just relief from cold and darkness, but validation of the techniques and wisdom that made survival not just possible, but sustainable throughout the long winter night. The water procurement methods that seemed so crucial during the early hours, the shelter improvements that made the difference between comfort and misery, the fire management skills that maintained warmth when it was most needed, all have proven their worth through practical application under the most demanding conditions winter could provide. As the quality of darkness continues its gradual transformation towards something less absolute, the guard feels the deep satisfaction that comes from duties properly performed, from challenges met with adequate preparation and sustained effort. The night that began with careful attention to practical necessities ends with a quiet confidence that comes from proven competence, from knowledge that human ingenuity and determination can create comfort and security, even in conditions that initially seem overwhelming. The stone walls that have sheltered him, the equipment that has served him, the techniques that have sustained him, all remain as reliable as they were during the night's most testing hours. But now they exist in a world that has begun its slow turn toward warmth and light. The guard who has learned to find adequacy in harsh conditions carries that knowledge forward into whatever challenges may come, understanding that proper preparation and systematic response can create success, even when circumstances seem designed to prevent it. As our time in this medieval world comes to a close, as the ancient stones begin to warm with approaching dawn, and the guard's long vigil nears its peaceful end, you too can begin to settle into your own quiet rest. The techniques of survival and endurance that carried him through winter's deepest test now fade into the gentle wisdom that preparation and persistence can overcome even the most challenging circumstances. Gently now, you begin to return from those frost-covered courtyards and ice-glazed walkways, leaving behind the world of medieval winters and patient guards who found ways to thrive in conditions that tested every aspect of human resourcefulness. The stone walls that provided shelter dissolve softly into the familiar walls of your own room. The cold that demanded such careful attention replaced by the comfortable temperature that surrounds you now. The heavy clothing and equipment that seemed so essential in that distant world become unnecessary as you rest in warmth and safety, protected by walls and heating that those ancient guards could hardly have imagined. The techniques that seemed so important for survival in harsh conditions transform into simple appreciation for the comfort that surrounds you, the ease that allows rest without concern for cold or danger. Your own breathing, no longer visible in frigid air, settles into the natural rhythm of someone who rests in safety and warmth. The careful attention to water and warmth that occupied the guard throughout his long watch becomes simply the knowledge that you are comfortable and secure. That rest can come without the systematic vigilance that winter conditions demanded. The equipment and tools that seem so crucial for survival fade into the understanding that you need nothing more than the soft bed that supports you and the quiet room that shelters you from any discomfort. Feel your body sinking deeper into comfort that requires no maintenance, no careful adjustment of layers or systematic attention to warmth. The bed that supports you offers the kind of reliable comfort that the medieval guard could only dream of during his long cold watch. Softness that needs no improvement. Warmth that requires no fuel to maintain. Your head rests against pillows that provide perfect support without the need for careful positioning or ongoing adjustment, while blankets offer warmth that flows around you naturally, requiring no techniques or systematic management to remain effective. The muscles that might have grown tense with cold in that distant winter world now release completely into the comfort that surrounds you. Your shoulders, which might have hunched against bitter wind, now settle into perfect relaxation against soft bedding that cradles every part of your body. Your hands, which might have required careful protection from freezing metal and ice, now rest gently at your sides or folded across your chest, warm and comfortable without any need for mittens or protective wrappings. Every part of your body finds its natural position of rest, supported and warmed without effort or attention. The feet that might have required such careful navigation across ice-covered stones now rest comfortably beneath covers that provide warmth without weight, softness without constraint. Your legs stretch naturally into positions that require no adjustment for comfort or safety, muscles releasing tension that you might not have realized they were carrying. The systematic attention to clothing and equipment that seems so important in that harsh world becomes simply the awareness that you are perfectly comfortable as you are, needing nothing more than the rest that comes naturally in such ideal conditions. Your breathing slows naturally into the deeper rhythm of someone who rests without concern, without the need to warm cold air or manage visible breath in freezing temperatures. Each breath comes easily and comfortably, your lungs drawing in air that requires no special attention or technique to process safely. The careful breathing patterns that help the guard maintain alertness through his long watch transform into the effortless respiration of someone who can simply allow their body to breathe as it chooses, without conscious direction or systematic management. Each exhale releases not just air, but any remaining tension from that world of stone and ice, any lingering sense of the vigilance that winter conditions demanded. Your breath flows out, carrying with it the memory of cold and challenge, leaving behind only the peaceful awareness of warmth and safety. Breathing in brings comfort and calm. Breathing out carries away anything that might interfere with perfect rest. The rhythm establishes itself naturally, each breath a little deeper than the last, each exhale a little more complete in its release of anything that might disturb your peace. The sounds around you, unlike the sharp clarity of winter air that carried every small noise across frozen landscapes, create a gentle background that supports rest rather than demanding attention. Perhaps the soft hum of heating systems that maintain perfect temperature without your involvement, or the gentle whisper of air moving through spaces designed for comfort rather than survival. These sounds, if you notice them at all, serve only to confirm that you rest in a world designed for ease rather than endurance, comfort rather than challenge. Your mind, which might have needed to maintain the systematic alertness that winter watch duty required, now settles into the kind of peaceful quiet that comes when vigilance is no longer necessary. Thoughts that might have focused on practical concerns of warmth and safety now drift into the pleasant vagueness that precedes sleep, concerns dissolving into the understanding that everything you need for perfect rest surrounds you already. The mental discipline that seems so important for maintaining effectiveness through challenging conditions becomes simply the gentle awareness that you can let your mind rest as completely as your body. Let sleep come gently, without the systematic approach that survival once required, without techniques or methods that demand attention and effort. Sleep in this comfortable world needs no management, no careful timing or strategic planning. It arrives naturally when you simply allow it, flowing around you like warmth from perfect blankets, supporting you like the ideal softness of your bed. There is no need to maintain alertness, no requirement for ongoing attention to changing conditions that might affect your comfort or safety. No need to fight sleep or direct its arrival. No necessity for the kind of controlled awareness that once seemed so important for navigating challenging conditions. Simply allow yourself to drift into rest that requires nothing from you except the willingness to accept the comfort that surrounds you. Let your breathing deepen without conscious direction. Let your muscles release without systematic attention. Let your mind settle into quiet without the vigilance that once seemed so necessary for safety and survival. The guard's long watch ends with dawn's gentle arrival, his duties completed successfully through preparation and persistence. Your rest begins with the same gentle certainty, supported by comfort that requires no maintenance, surrounded by warmth that needs no fuel, protected by safety that demands no vigilance. Sleep comes as naturally as dawn follows night, as inevitably as warmth returns after winter's deepest cold, carrying you into rest as perfect and complete as the peace that settles over stone walls when morning finally arrives.